Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. We're broadcasting live from Sedona, Arizona today, and we have got an amazing topic for you. We're going to talk about aging and the idea that aging is actually a disease and that it should be tackled with therapies that can address cell damage incurred with time. Bioinformatics should assist by collecting, storing, and analyzing data from clinical studies. And the facts are our rapidly aging population needs urgent assistance. We must speed up the time it takes for a drug proven successful in animal trials to be offered to human patients. And our guest today is none other than Elizabeth Parrish, who is the founder and CEO of BioViva, a company committed to extending healthy lifespans using cell technologies. Liz is a humanitarian, an entrepreneur, an innovator, podcaster, and a leading voice for genetic cures. As a strong proponent of progress and education for the advancement of regenerative medicine modalities, she serves as a motivational speaker to the public at large for the life sciences. She is actively involved in international education, media outreach, and we are going to dive into a lot of topics today, including gene therapy, some of the R&D she's been able to do at Rutgers University, what bioinformatics is, and maybe one of the most controversial topics, which is patient access. Liz, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks for having me. I want to live in that intro. I need to raise my energy level to match yours. That is amazing. That's inspiring, and that is awesome, which is the name of your podcast.
Thank you very much. And so let's talk about maybe a little bit of background. How did you get into the topic of bioinformatics and gene therapy? When I hear those things, I go, is this like Frankenstein lab? Is there like computers hooked up to my cells? What's going on? What do these things mean for the layman and understanding? And how did you find yourself in this exciting field?
Well, I was a layperson, and from 2011 to 2013, I volunteered for a stem cell project, a project that was educating the world about the regenerative capacity of stem cells and how magnificent and awesome they were. And I became interested in why stem cells are different, and they're different because of their genetics. So all cells in your body have the same genes, but some cells have genes that actually upregulate regeneration and repair your body. And that was all fabulous and fantastic, except for in 2013, my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And while I was in the hospital, I asked them about all of this fabulous research that I had read about and studied with this stem cell group, and asked them if any of that was available for my son. And they said, not only was it not available for my son, they labeled it experimental medicine, in which sounded like a really dirty, awful term. And they said, your son has a treatable disease. There are kids here dying. Maybe you should consider yourself lucky. And boy, I'll tell you, all of that just didn't fit in my head. Why does this technology not translate to humans? So I went looking to find cures for kids, and I ended up at a conference. It was vastly about aging, but they had the professor of genetics from Harvard there and other people who were talking about the genetic root cause of disease. So I thought this was well worth my time. And I got super turned on to a field that not only can help an aging population live better longer, but can cure those childhood diseases as well. And that's through the modality of gene therapy, using therapeutic genes that upregulate regeneration and cure a plethora of childhood and aging diseases, and then help us succinctly and exactly cure the congenital diseases that we otherwise couldn't cure with these regenerative therapies, essentially making a whole population of humans healthier, happier, live longer well. So that's how I got started, and it's been a long road since then.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand some of the complications that arise from conditions such as type 1 diabetes and the long-term consequences. And of course, the later part of the aging process is significantly more likely to have a bunch of what I'd say life compromising consequences over and above the natural aging process. And if you really understand the course of a lifetime of someone who has diabetes, you can recognize, so certainly as a mom would say, hey, wait a second, I think it would be great to start using some of these techs now, so that the future, what we call the biospan, the how long you're able to live healthily by, is a higher probability of success, which seems to make moral and ethical sense. Then there's the side of it of people, which you talked about in your biography, about people who are in the aging process right now and are on what I would call therapeutics. And what I mean by that, to qualify, is we have a medical model that is not based on treating the cause of disease. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, it is designed not to treat or cure disease, but to address the symptoms of. And that model generates tremendous amount of profits for people who are on a drug that you are dependent on to live some sort of semi-compromised, normal, dependent lifestyle on those companies because of the way the profit design is built into it, as opposed to addressing the fundamental issue, which is what I believe you're talking about in gene therapy. Is that what your kind of thrust is inside your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're focused on therapeutic cures through gene therapy. We are not concerned or considering multiple treatments for people and limping them along through life on a dependency. The beauty about gene therapy is that it's considered in many cases a one-time treatment for a lifetime therapeutic benefit. Now, as we look and study gene therapies over time, you may need to take them maybe every 5 or 10 years. But the beauty of the technology is long-term upregulated expression at the cellular level of therapeutic genes that are natural to humans. So when you think of it, it's almost like the most holistic thing to possibly do. The drugs that you're talking about previously are, pills that you often take. They're often in pill form. They hurt your liver, they damage your kidneys, they have a myriad of side effects. One of the side effects you might be looking for in something called a statin is lowering your LDL cholesterol. But one of the other side effects is 1 in 4 people will get type 2 diabetes from those drugs, and 1 in 10 will get dementia. And those are not well expressed to the population. Now, am I saying don't take your drugs? No, I'm not saying that. Keep taking your drugs as prescribed by your doctor, but you must push for legislation. You must push your political affiliates to actually pass better regulation in drug standards and better access for patients. And that's essentially what I've been writing my thesis on, is a new route to drug development in which patients who are terminally ill or have no other treatment for their disease. Remember, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, these are life sentences. Even if you can remiss them or slow them, those are life sentences. Those people should have access to the best medicine, not medicine that's over 15 years old, which, by the way, anything that your doctor can prescribe you is over 15 years old. Innovation in medicine is happening way faster than that, and we need people to get access now.
So can you explain to our listeners what gene therapy is, how it works, and who is most likely to benefit from it, and who's using it maybe now today, and who's not able to use that under the current political environment that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so that's a lot of things. So what is gene therapy? Gene therapy is the delivery or the editing of genes in your body. So the delivery in this case would be of a therapeutic gene that upregulates regeneration into the cells, makes cells behave more youthfully. So what is aging? Aging is cellular degeneration over time. It's the body, slowly going through like an entropy type system, but it's not necessary because our bodies naturally kill themselves, right? But with over time, the damage just accumulates so greatly that it's hard for them to heal the damage. So when we use these type of genes, it basically overcomes the amount of damage, and the idea is to regenerate faster than you degenerate, therefore living healthier. So when we deliver gene therapies, we use, it sounds very scary, but we use defunct viruses. And what that is a virus. In the case of most gene therapies today, it's AAV. It's a virus that is ubiquitous. It doesn't really get people very sick. but it has the ability to dock with the cell and put genetic material into the nucleus. And so it can't get you sick. We take out its ability to replicate. They're called attenuated viruses. They can't get you sick. And then we trick them into delivering human genes, essentially. And that is how we get the genes in there. Then the gene goes on to replicate proteins. So the genes in your body make proteins, and that makes you. And so these have a therapeutic benefit to the cells and then the cells around them. And that's what gene therapy is. Now, there are hundreds of gene therapy trials going on. So, our company isn't the only person, the only company doing gene therapy, and I'm not the only person who has taken gene therapy. There are gene therapies for hemophilia A and hemophilia B and sickle cell anemia. And they're literally working towards a cure for those diseases. And then there's a few gene therapies that have already passed through regulation, like spinal muscular atrophy, which is a childhood disease. And there's Luxturna has a drug that actually helps with congenital blindness. And severe combined immune deficiency, which is boy in the bubble disease, has been effectively cured with gene therapy. Now, the problem is when you said, well, who then gets access to these therapies? Well, these therapies are really expensive. So one example is severe spinal muscular atrophy. Let's pull that one up. That is often found in children who are infants. And if they don't get access to the gene therapy, they would die within months. The gene therapy itself costs over $2 million. This is not where we can go with this technology. I mean, essentially, the technology is expensive. It's very cost prohibitive to build a gene therapy per person. It's not BS. It's not like making pills. But we need to create gene therapies that are actually affordable to the whole world. And so when you're treating a rare disorder like spinal muscular atrophy, which is a great thing to treat because children need these gene therapies immediately, you're actually treating a small percentage of the world. And so the research and development and everything goes behind those drugs becomes enormously expensive for a very small population. But treating aging with gene therapy should make cost-effective drugs for everyone. And so who's the target market? It's everyone. So whether you have type 1 diabetes or you have dementia in your family, those are all life sentences, and those are all something that diseases that could be benefited from regenerative medicine. Some of those, like autoimmune disorders like type 1, will need more specialized gene therapies in combination, but helping people live longer, healthier in general is just, that's the first place to start.
I like the approach because, it only stands to marketing 101, and ultimately it's going to be money that drives this whole system to get it to the population. If you have millions and millions of, a third of the population dies from cancer, a third of the population dies from diabetes, a third dies from heart disease. Okay, so so we've got cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. Okay, so if we are able to address that with gene therapy, let's say those three issues, we're going to be able to drive the price per person down significantly because there's so many people suffering from it that a lot of that tech is going to be able to distribute it and then bring the cost per unit down, and which it would seem that attacking it from the one that has the most positive impact would be the logical case. Why has that not been the case to date, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, when gene therapy, when we first started getting the glimpse of gene therapy in the 1970s, all of the technology around it wasn't quite there yet. And it wasn't made as a priority. It should have been a priority. It should have been a project that was run as hard, if not harder, than the US military. Instead of creating killing machines, we should be, actually saving lives. And then in the 1990s, the gene therapy area emerged really strongly, and then it had a major setback. So in 1999, a patient died of a gene therapy. His name was Jesse Gilsinger, and he died due to a reaction to the viruses that they used to use at that time. That virus is specifically not used anymore for that reason. But the problem with humans and the problem with our perceptions is that it was time to take a moment for pause on that viral vector, but it was not time to stop. Because this year alone, over 100,000 people will die in the United States taking their prescription drugs as prescribed as adverse events, severe adverse events. And that's not publicized. So we tend to focus on the shark attack rather than focusing on the tidal wave, right?
Correct.
One person dies in a shark attack, we affix ourselves to that. We say, stop, stop all swimming in that area forever. And then the tidal wave wipes out a bunch of people and we call it a natural disaster. So, it's actually quite unfortunate that it slowed the industry so much. And if it had not, although, my heart goes out to that family and that child, that there is nothing that can replace that loss, of course. But because of that, droves of people potentially have died of diseases that should have been addressed by gene therapy over the last 2 decades.
Well, I think we have to look historically, and all progress inside of humanity has come at a risk consequence to the people engaged in that, whether that was sailing to North America from an overpopulated tyrannical regimes in Europe that made the average quality of life for an average person unbearable. It was better to take the risk. And yes, a lot of people died on that voyage, and a lot of people got sick, and a lot of people didn't make it, and many people died when they got here. But that became the foundations of perhaps the most contributive nation in the world history. You could go back as far back to 10,000 generations, in tribal warfare, and a woman running from a burning village carrying her babies across the savannah. No difference. There was certainly risk, but the risk of staying where they was you're in a burning village with somebody who wants to butcher you and your family. And so we're not able to contextualize this experience. And I think there's a North American, I would say it's a real hiccup, and is that we've sanitized death in such a way that's kind of put in this, sanitized, tightly contained box that we never really deal with. It's just kind of put away, and there's a little minor statistics that you talk about once in your life with your life insurance provider, and that's it, right? And as opposed to when you're walking down the streets of Calcutta and there's people dying on the ground or dead bodies, and you're surrounded with the magnitude and impetus of sudden and quick death, or tragic and long-term suffering, which is overwhelming. And this, I do believe, creates a perception issue, which leads to, let's just face it, inadequate policy. Can you tell me how you have been kind of fusing your work at your R&D at Rutgers with this theme called bioinformatics to maybe start changing this whole mindset to be able to distribute gene therapy in a moral and an ethical way, in a universal way that makes it more accessible to people?
Well, I want to touch on what you said. That's what I'm trying to get to. The risk aversion is literally killing us at this point, because we're not demanding access to new technologies. Our risk aversion is what is going to lead to more deaths than absolutely necessary. And at any point, even though bioinformatics is very useful, AI cannot solve this problem for us because biology is very complex. So we have to learn more about biology and how drugs work before AI can absolutely fix the problem. But it can go a long ways to helping us. So at Rutgers University, we decided that we got a project together and decided that essentially what we're doing in gene therapy is inefficient. So AAV, even though it's a relatively safe carrier of genes to the cell, has its own limitations. And curing aging is not going to be one gene. Curing aging is going to be a multitude of genes. We know that it's a very complex disorder. We look at the hallmarks of aging. There's 9 different hallmarks, and not one gene actually will fix all of those problems. So what we do with bioinformatics is we look at what genes will work and what genes will help in what areas. And then we combined the resources of some very intelligent people on the planet to try to find a vector that could, in this case, I'm talking about an attenuated viral vector, a virus that can't get you sick, but a vector that could actually carry all of those genes. And so we decided to look at the cytomegalovirus. It's a big word, but you can break it down to CMV is what we call it. And it delivers multiple genes to cells. And not only did the delivery method work, our mice, yes, you have to do this stuff in mice initially, they lived 40% longer than the controls. So that's really fantastic.
As we get a little bit deeper into this topic of gene therapy and why you're such a big advocate for it, particularly around aging, can you explain, you brought up a couple points here about like how AI can't solve the problem, and you've got I would say intelligent resources who are looking at the vectors of aging. Is this part of the bioinformatics conversation? Is that what that means? Like, can you explain how that bioinformatics, that word, which I haven't heard before specifically,
yeah, so
what that is and how does that determine what you're doing?
So what I mean by AI can't solve the problem, because that will be a very inflammatory statement to a lot of people. AI is
Sure.
dependent on us, okay? We have to put what we actually understand into AI. We are still learning how genes interplay with the other 20-some thousand genes when you manipulate them. So there are some things that we as humans need to understand, just like a calculator. A calculator doesn't really know 1 through 0. We had to understand 1 through 0, and then we program it to give us even a greater understanding. So AI is able to do amazing things. It will solve a bunch of our problems, but we're still at that early point where humans are still part of the input process. And so what I'm saying is today, this is still very much manual learning, and it's still animal studies. Otherwise, we would just be able to, type in a gene, and then the AI system would tell us everything that gene does, every interaction. So we're still in a very human dependent point of AI. So we're still at the early calculator. Maybe we know 1 through 5, but not 1 through 0.
Here's a question that I know is going to be on everybody's talk, because these are the debates, and there's two, I guess, progenitors of these two conversations. And one is, will AI eventually take over humans, and will gene therapy create mutants or be used for by military operations to, create super soldiers or take over other people? Or will we create these fusion, artificially intelligent, genetically mutant species? Like how do you navigate the potential negative side effects with the potential benefits? Because I think there's a lot of what I would call social media conversations, and you have, whether it's Elon Musk making his commentary on a Joe Rogan podcast, saying, basically it's done for humanity. We're going to be fused creatures. And other people maybe on the religious side that says that, like hyper religious, like we need to exterminate all of these experiments because it's unnatural and unholy. And then we have a scientific community such as yourself, which is saying, no, this is the most noble and ethical thing that we can do for the quality of life for mankind moving forward. What's that like in your, what is the parameters that you put on those things as a company and in your research? I think people would be interested in knowing that.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a lot of things. I mean, we could really break that down into a multitude of areas. I mean, humans are ever evolving. So, we're already, as you mentioned, we're already evolving with devices that are becoming like an extension of our minds. And in many ways, they're very great. Now, if you get into advertising, they're probably not that good. If, something is steering you towards buying decisions, but they give us the ability to not have to remember everything. And that's really fantastic. So when you're looking at hardware and software, you're looking at the merging of a human with the future that we can't quite foresee, but we can start with some experiments. We can look at a multitude of species. As a matter of fact, 99.9% of all species who already have gone extinct.
Correct.
And then we know that we have to make decisions for ourselves. So if this was a static world and it was utopia, we had abundance for everyone and no one had to want for anything, and the climate wasn't changing and pollution wasn't developing and genetic mutations weren't happening because of a myriad of pollution issues and other things, and disease wasn't prevalent, then I would say that we would be in a situation where we were doing everything right, especially if we had very few limitations. That's not the world we live in. And so that's the world, though, we can create through technology. And so as much as we built a roof over our heads and we learned to farm and raise crops, and then we learned to create the calculator that, now quite independently works better than I do, we have already substantially changed things, and antibiotics and immunizations are the biggest game changers in lifespan, as a matter of fact. So with that, if you take antibiotics out of the equation, if people want to die naturally, most people watching this would already be dead. So we live much longer than people just did 150 years ago, and that's all on the back of science. It's sanitation, antibiotics, immunization, and workplace safety, which is a form of science itself. And all of the science and the engineering and structure around you. I mean, just some 70 years ago, people were still making light sockets that might shock people to death, because they weren't really working out the problems. And then they eventually did work out the problems. So when we're looking at the future human, we need to be a little bit more open-minded. And actually, this is a great thing. I have spoken at many religious events, Mormons, Christians. I met the Dalai Lama on stage and had a live discussion with him about gene therapy. All of these religions actually really love this. I mean, they would, of course, believe that the science being given to us is something worth using. Now, there's probably some people in some places that are not maybe up on, they might have congregations that speak differently about technology, but many of those institutes believe that this technology was handed to us, and it is a divine right to participate in technology that would help us live longer and healthier, and that it is the message of their messiahs, right, or their gods, or otherwise. So it's not all groups, but certainly some groups. But let's put things into historical perspective just to get back on the right track and show where at one point we thought very incorrectly, and then how we changed that, but how we can even change that to the better. So in 1960, we saw a big shift. And 1960 wasn't that long ago, maybe for you and I, longer ago for people who are younger than us. In 1960, it was the first shift to the government helping to actually fund a cure for cancer. Now, why did this happen? This happened because of a couple non-scientist advocates. They were just patient advocates, and a couple of medical doctors getting together to say that maybe cancer wasn't just natural. Does this sound familiar? Because everybody says aging is natural. You shouldn't treat it. It's a natural process. Well, it was believed by the US government that cancer was not a fundable condition because it was a natural process, that people just got cancer and it wasn't worth putting money into, a natural process. But because very few people got together, like 6 people got together, and they started petitioning back then when it was much harder to do that, sending things into the mail all over the United States, and got letters back in support, that they were able to radically change the stance of cancer being just a natural condition that shouldn't be treated. And now people live decades after diagnosis. So you can see how the mindset change is really the biggest barrier to treating aging. In model organisms, in mice, we have extended their healthy lifespan. I mean, they keep their hair, their musculature, their cognitive ability much longer. They lived 40% longer, happier and healthier than their peers. And what we did wasn't new science. The same gene has been used a multitude of times. It's been used in human cells. I used it in my human body in 2015 to start this company, along with another gene called follistatin. It's called telomerase reverse transcriptase. It's a gene that just lengthens the telomeres at the ends of the caps of the chromosomes. And this is not new technology. It's been around, but no one's funding it to get it through clinical trials. And these are really the next steps. These are the next steps of saying, okay, so today people are like, antibiotics are natural and immunizations are fine with many people, not all people, but many people, and they understand the health benefits. And washing my hands is a good idea. They don't understand they're participating in science. Gene therapy would just mean that you go in maybe once every 10 years and you take an injection, takes 20 minutes, and you would leave and you would just cut your risk of, let's say, heart disease, cancer, dementia, and type 2 diabetes more than in half if our animal studies are right. And
which is a pretty profound statement on itself. I mean, you're saying that technology right now exists.
The technology exists and it works in mice. We want it to work in humans, and that's the goal of our company.
How far away do you think, if you had all the green lights, that would be deliverable to the population at large? Do you think if you can get the green lights from the political environment that would allow you to do that?
I think that we could start doing it next year. If we could get the green light in humans, by my thesis, by what I wrote as a route to ethically help people right here in the United States, we could have the infrastructure for my guidelines within a year. And I believe that they're absolutely reasonable and that Congress could, in fact, sign off on those. Now, that would take the population of the country, at least a percentage of the population, demanding that. So here are some good examples. AIDS vaccines. There is no AIDS vaccines. They're still building on that, but the AIDS drugs. So people came out in droves. They walked on Washington. They demanded access to drugs for HIV, and they got them within 2 years. The COVID-19 pandemic, we have immunizations within 1 year. If they want to move fast, they can move really fast. It doesn't have to be approved, right? There could be another route, just like the vaccines, to getting access to these gene therapies that wasn't approved, that we could still be collecting vital data and helping patients right now.
So here's a question for you then that comes up in my mind. Of course, we're operating out of the United States at the moment and the political machinations that are involved in that process. Where in the world is already green lighted this process that I am quite sure, if the technology is available, there's somebody somewhere with a big bank account that's saying, I'm all in. There's individual private citizens flying to space now. Why wouldn't individual private citizens been doing that? And is there places that that's happening, or do you anticipate that those are going to start to emerge as the pressure of having something that valuable and useful becomes available? People are going to find a jurisdiction where they can do this.
Well, absolutely. So there are companies who already participate in these type of technologies. We work with them because we will do bioinformatic data. That's essentially the assessment of data in a study that is done anywhere in the world, under any premise, as long as we can help design the study, because we think that human data is way more important than animal data. So the mouse data that I just talked to you about, the caveat with that is mice are not a good predictor for what happens in a human. We've seen it over and
Right.
over again. We've seen companies spend $100 million on animal studies for a drug that never works in a human. So it's just really the wrong way around. And drugs like penicillin and aspirin would have never made it through small animal studies because they would have killed them. So, and those were definitely crucial to the survival of humans. So, and I think that there should be a basic safety/efficacy study in an animal model. So you basically have some endpoints to go by, and then people should be accessing this type of technology very quickly. But as far as people who want to get access to these technologies, that type of access is available outside of the US. I can't say specific areas because it depends on doctors and it depends on the person participating. Under the right legal consent, medical doctors in certain jurisdictions can help patients who consent to get access to a multitude of different therapeutics legally.
So let's talk about your company specific and what you're doing in regards to your paper. You might want to talk about what you've been able to demonstrate with your paper, your thesis that's coming forward, and this whole topic about patient access and where your company is going to make this technology available right here in the USA. Can you paint us that picture so that we can say, hey, you know what? I want to get behind this. I want to get behind this. I want to live. I want to be 25 forever. I want to live to be 150 and be, rocking it down the street on my bicycle, doing wheelies. Like, is this a potential possibility? Do you see this happening? When, how, and what have you been able to demonstrate so far?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Well, in our animal studies, we demonstrated that the animals live younger, healthier, longer. In my own body in 2015, when we launched the company, I took 2 gene therapies and my biomarkers are great. We have a biostatistician working on those now and we'll be releasing those. But short synopsis, my telomeres slowly keep getting longer. My triglyceride levels are low. My blood glucose levels are low. And this is something that we see in medical tourism as well. So there's basically what that would show is probably benefits to protection against type 2 diabetes. The lengthening telomeres would just be, so telomeres are not a perfect aging clock, but they are an indicator of disease state. And so having a better length on your telomere is actually a good thing. So that should mean better overall health. So there are 2 routes that we could go with our drug development. One is the regulatory route. We do another few years of millions of dollars of animal studies, and if we still have a dime left, we may be able to start our first investigational new drug. It's called an IND in humans. And then we have about 8 to 15 years from there to get a drug to the population. A lot of people can't wait for that. My thesis is based on a new route of regulatory system based on the medical need to treat non-communicable diseases, aging-associated non-communicable diseases, which are the biggest killers on the planet. You already alluded that cancer, heart disease, dementia, and type 2 diabetes kill 80% of the population. And now non-communicable diseases are the biggest killer on the entire planet. So what is a non-communicable disease? It's a non-infectious disease. It's vastly the diseases of aging. Mostly the top 4 non-communicable diseases are all aging related diseases. So in my thesis, we would be working towards a regulatory new path that is disconnected from the United States FDA. It is still housed under the health department. Therefore, having that oversight, that is the part of government that's vastly overseen by the president. There's three pillars of government. And what it would do is essentially be a database for anyone with a non-treatable disease or a terminal disease could put their name in and their condition. And biotech companies like ours, if we have something to treat that condition, we can come up with innovative ways with the patient or nonprofit organizations in order to treat them immediately. We would have a minimum guideline instead of the millions of dollars to do business with the FDA. We'd have a minimal guideline of pre and post criteria for data gathering. We would demonstrate that data, whether the drug worked or didn't work, and then be able to actually use it to surpass phase 1 safety and halfway through phase 2 efficacy of the US FDA. Therefore, giving patients who need the drugs immediately, who don't have 15 years to wait, access now, whilst gathering data that would apply towards our FDA approval down the road and shorten the span that we would be in those sort of phase discoveries before releasing a drug on the population. The more data, the more effect towards the phase trials.
I remember specifically a news conference with the former administration and the government, and they brought in a lady who had a terminal condition, and under the Right to Try program, I believe it was classified, she took an experimental drug, which she was able to make a full functional recovery and extend her life, which was a pretty remarkable statement that went largely unreported in the media, which I thought was a major breakthrough, that we had a policy, we implemented a policy. It was like, hey, look, you've got a terminal condition. You don't have this time. Okay, yes, there's some risk involved, but we know what the result is otherwise. So why not have the right to try? And I do believe that the government let's qualify this for a statement. Government representatives should not place their perceptions over an individual citizen who is essentially an aspect of the government to take their shot at life, provided that they understand the risks and provided that they're doing so and recognizing that the liability falls fully on their own choice. Because yes, some of these things, like you alluded to in the past, aren't going to work, like the experiment in 1999. But we knew that one wasn't going, like, some of these aren't going to work, but some of them are. And from those wins, we can learn and develop these things which could have, like you said, unbelievable positive benefits over the long term.
Oh yeah. And in 1999, the gene actually worked. It was the delivery method actually made the kids sick. But no, I'm telling you that what you're saying is spot on. And a lot of people will say, wait a minute, well, then there is right to try. So there is something, but right to try doesn't work for new innovative drugs. It's only for drugs who have been at least through phase 1 trials, which is millions of dollars to do after your many multi-million-dollar animal studies. So, most of the innovations that are like the best innovations for today are still in the earlier phases. So just in case your listeners are like, wait a minute, then why wouldn't people just use right to try? Well, it's limited itself. And we need a good news network, like Good News Network, because this case that you're even talking about with this woman, I don't even know what she took, what she was cured of. Correct. And can you imagine when you're diagnosed with something and you're told that you're going to die? You don't have the wherewithal to go and do a bunch of research. And in Right to Try, you have to do a bunch of research. You've got to actually go and find a drug candidate that might help you and talk a company into using it on you.
So which leads us to this next question, which is, this is where we are as a civilization right now with the advent of proliferated media, which is run through mathematical algorithms, which are supported by a variety of companies or individuals with certain political agendas that they want to push forward. And I'm a big fan of listening to particularly Eric and Brett Weinstein, who run podcast. Eric is I believe, a physicist of great acclaim, and his brother is an evolutionary biologist. And they have very interesting and well thought out perspectives, and they're not political in their endeavors. They go through systematically what I call real science and bring it to a point where some of us lay people can understand. But one of the common elements they talked about between Brett, Eric, and Brett's wife, Heather, these are 3 PhDs which have world-changing technology that they have proven and demonstrated in a university setting, which are being cordoned off by these political machinations, which that is not widely distributed to the public as opportunity. And in Eric's case, is we're still running on the technology that was developed 70 years ago in physics, essentially, in the world today. And that if within their sphere, they're literally supper table, they have 3 people who have life-changing. How many of these people, such as yourself, who are standing here and saying, look, I could deliver this in a year if we had the go-ahead lights? Who knows the amount of human hours of quality of life that might be, or the value that's created? Like, it's not even measurable, the exponential possibilities of this. What is it going to take to blow past these platforms which are cordoning off these breakthroughs because of whatever agenda they're trying to serve? How do we get past this? Like, how do we smash these things and let people live their lives the way that they always have and to move forward?
Well, I don't know the people that you're talking about, but it sounds fantastic. I think that, again, it's grassroots movement. It really comes down to what people demand access to, just like in HIV. The COVID demanded that the government do something fast, but maybe that was more on their heels. Politicians are servants of the public, and oftentimes that is forgotten. The whole thing has sort of been flipped on its head, that we appear to be servants the other way around. We just get what we're doled out. People really need to demand access. And I know that's like the hardest thing to say, because then that puts it on everyone who's listening to go and do something about it. But it really is that. People need to march on Washington and demand access to aging treatments. They need to demand that these new innovative drugs actually get to people, and not just for me and not just for my company. I'm talking about all of these companies who are putting their necks out there that are likely to just go bust because we can't keep up with the pharmaceutical amount of money that the pharmaceutical companies have, that they put behind lobbying and put behind how much it costs to do drug development, and the raising bar of that. Did you know that it was estimated by Tufts University just a couple of years ago that now to get a drug through development and get it to the public is now $2.6 billion.
100%. I hadn't heard that particular topic.
Why is it $2.6 billion? Why? That doesn't even make sense, because the amount of money doesn't mean the drug is safer. The unsafe drugs are passed all the time. Drugs that come out on the market and then they have to be pulled off the market because they harm too many people. How is it that that money equates somehow that these are safe drugs? The gene and cell technology area is where people want to be. That's where you want to invest, because that's using your cell becomes the drug factory. You don't have, all of these, sort of misfires all over the body. And will things go wrong? Probably, but they don't have to go wrong to that exponential amount that they have historically gone wrong with this more exact science that is, yes, backed by AI and big data and things like that, that is growing with our ability to amass the knowledge into those systems.
So let's talk about that specifically, because you've illustrated a point that being in the holistic nutrition industry, we've been dealing with a highly regulated conversation for the last several decades as pharmaceutical organizations and their political machinations really cordon off what we can say or do with relatively inexpensive health technology. And you're on the opposite end of that spectrum, but still providing opportunities again. And we're up against the same, I guess, hegemonic enterprise where the amount of money, power, and influence that a very small group of companies have in our political system seems to be distorted, just much like our information distribution system is now become the same thing. In other words, if it's not something that we agree with, that just gets squeezed out on an algorithm. If we don't like what you have to say, even if it's truthful, we just squeeze that out on an algorithm. If we don't like the way that you're coming together with this cost-effective technology that's going to upset our $100 billion marker, then we're gonna cordon off progress. Isn't that a death sentence for humanity itself? Because we're not able to. I mean, we've been able to survive and do well on the planet because of evolution, because of our impetus to innovate. What happens do you feel if a species stops to innovating?
Well, it's the death of the species. It's the 99.9% of species.
Correct.
And often the problem is that ego gets in the way. But we're talking about distinctly three different industries, and therefore there should be three different, then in that case, regulatory paths. We're talking about natural products, many of them that have really good clinical trial data. By the way, just in case someone doesn't know, you should always go look that up. There's a lot of evidence behind these, and it's less expensive to get the evidence because they're naturally occurring products. Then there's the not the nutraceuticals, that's where we were before. Then there's the pharmaceuticals, and these were made with good intention. Some of them are still good drugs. They're certainly necessary right now. And they are formulations that generally started by spinning off the nutraceuticals and becoming patents, things that were patentable. But some of them did get better at what they were doing. They sometimes became more detrimental too. So this is a completely different industry, and this is the US FDA, and there's some really bad players in there. So these are where we get some good drugs and a lot of bad drugs, and that has that crazy regulatory route that takes forever and for a good reason. And again, those drugs often get through those routes and turn out to harm people. But then there's the gene therapy. So here, let's think of this as a matter of cost. We've got the nutraceuticals, we've got the pharmaceuticals, and then we've got the gene therapy. The gene therapy needs a different path because it's more succinct, exact science at the cellular level. We can glean a lot of what happens from a dish and then move it into the whole organism. And but you can see why these should have completely different regulatory paths, and your area shouldn't be fighting with this area, and my area shouldn't be fighting with this area. They're their own pillars, and there should be, just completely different paths, but with good evidence base for humans, because that's what matters most, right? And so I think that, that kind of helps demystify. Now, what I'm trying to do in my thesis is demystify this one and this one, these two, because this seems
Correct.
to be the ones that need decoupling in my mind's eye. Perhaps we should be doing three.
Well, I think there's a fourth phase, which I kind of referred to, which is the dissemination of information, because you can't have a movement. For example, if you're talking about what you do and that gets regulated by the Google algorithms, for example, to use an example, guess what? Nobody knows about it. And for example, specific to our conversation, here is a person on a right to try stuff that almost nobody knows happened. I happened to come across the press conference through an alternative media, and the woman was exceptionally excited and delighted. Obviously, she had a death sentence. She had a radical new drug therapy, and she's living healthy and wonderful, and was so excited about that. Went nowhere. You don't see this disseminated on CNN. You don't see this on at the top of your YouTube box or your Apple News box on your
Well,
media phones.
that's
So
because, what we need to tell people is, it's hard. You've had a long day and you sit down to your computer or your phone and you see options. Okay. We all have options. And one of them is the shark attack. The other one is the big bloody mess. The other one is, mass destruction. And there might be one that is just something good,
right.
and it just doesn't get clicked on. So we have to make better choices. Often I'm like, oh, I go to click and I have to stop myself. I say, oh, you just don't do it. Just don't do it. Because that's what perpetuates it, is really our choices. When we start making different choices, the whole media will start making different choices. But it comes down to how we're wired. We are wired for the disaster.
Yeah, the amygdala response, the threat detection mechanism is why people slow down on a highway, why people click on the car crash killed 3 people, why people focus on the negative as opposed to. So would you say, as a civilization, part of getting this advocacy is to transcend our old amygdala-based mechanisms, which are working on threats, and instead directing our consciousness towards opportunities?
Absolutely. And one way to kind of retrain your brain and get really excited about the future is, well, Hans Rosling, he was the health minister, I think, of Finland, or Sweden. Sorry, here I am. It's been a while since I read that book, but he wrote a fantastic book about progress. And the world has not become a worse place. If you look at the media, he even shows in his diagrams, people who watch the media tend to think all of these terrible things are happening in the world and that they're exponentially out of control and humans are awful and, we're doomed. And yet, science shows that we've actually become a better world in all ways. And we use science for the good. Sometimes it gets used for the bad, but the media extrapolates that rather than, talking about, the true human rights and the absolute ethic issues behind all of these type of new technologies. Even we recently came under fire for doing business with companies that do offshore studies. It was considered unethical that a company had treated dementia patients with a gene therapy. Did this article say anything about many, more than half of the country can't afford healthcare? I mean, in a meaningful way. They might be able to have some basic healthcare insurance, but that doesn't mean they afford to go to the doctor. Did they say anything about the price of insulin? Something that costs pennies to make is the 6th most expensive liquid on the planet, at least in this country it is. Did they say anything about how the United States is only 5% of the world's population? We take 75% of the pharmaceutical drugs and we have the shortest lifespan of any industrialized country? No, they didn't talk about any of the real ethical issues of what forces people out of this system to try to stay alive. They didn't talk about the astronomical costs and how, people die not being able to treat basic disease. They didn't talk about, people having amputations because their insurance won't pay to have a limb reattached and the complications. I mean, it's really disappointing to me. I have not lost faith. I'm very much a mother, and I think that as humanity, we just need to grow. We need to set our egos aside, and we need to move on. I'm not giving up, but I'm really sad that the media, instead of seeing a situation and saying, wow, these people are really trying, because that would be good news and people might not click on it, they make up a story and essentially, bastardize a whole bunch of companies who went out on a limb to help people live longer and healthier. It's weird to me. And it was all paid for too. People didn't give money to participate, or nobody got tricked or scammed, or, it's just a very sad state of affairs. The media is often lying to you. They're just trying to get a click.
Well, I found it interesting. I think recently it was identified, to give an example of this related to my field. I think Dr. Mercola was outlined as one of the most dangerous persons in society by the current administration, a doctor that spent his life advocating health technologies to people to experiment with, none of which have any negative consequences, which I found quite humorous.
Well, I don't know him, but I imagine in his case, it will actually just gain him millions of followers and probably millions of dollars. I mean, the net effect is that, people are pretty, they'll click on it, but they're pretty tired of the media.
So let's talk about BioViva, particularly as we're winding up. I want to be mindful of your time. What are you doing? How are you raising capital for this obviously hyper expensive endeavor? And what are the requirements that you see from both an engineering or a business engineering, as well as a political engineering components, in order to make these therapies available to the population?
Boy, that's a lot. So we will be opening to funding in September. This is 2021, and we're excited about that. We'll be doing our big push to move these drugs to preclinical status. That's in animal models acceptable for human use, and to IND for the regulatory system, because we're not giving up. We really are just huge proponents of not getting in any debates or battles. I really love humans. I know why they get polarized. I know why they become on team A and team B, and I want to be a mediator between those two. So I can sit here and I can complain about a few things, but the truth is I'm really a mediator to a better future. And so I want to work with the government. I want to work with grassroots movements in order to show that the demand is there for these technologies and that people want to live healthier and longer. So it's both a social engineering and a biological engineering on the research and development side. Will continue to spill out good data on how awesome these therapies are working or where they're not working, which is just as important. Failures is just as important as your successes. And really build towards a new world. And the world of the future is people getting along. It's taking care of the planet, and it's living healthier longer. And I believe that, living healthier longer is one of the biggest keys to the other two, because it makes people feel like they're more engaged and more, they have a lot more to lose if the climate doesn't go very well. It also, we know there's something called mortality priming. As we become older, we get more, maybe you might call it curmudgeon-y, where we start stockpiling resources and becoming insular. That's not how we want to be as a species. We want to reach out to each other. We want to connect. We want to solve the problems. Now, there's touchy issues around solving problems, because when you start to uncover what the actual issues are, again, people get their egos into it. So we have to learn to disengage the ego and move toward the future. Now, because you know me, I believe that the future is genetic engineering. I believe that we need to be an open-minded species prepared for the future. We're going to have to take a few risks, but the benefits are massive. And of course, as you know, from following me, I believe that, my ideal biology would be one that interfaces with AI, but that we genetically make just as fast and just as relevant, so that we never become irrelevant through biology and gene therapy. So I believe that the march of the future is change. And I believe that those who want to live long and well will. They will need to be open to change, and that people who are not, will not join the future. They will past normal lives, and the species hopefully will become a healthier and happier species in which we don't have to see our children get sick of disease. And if they are born sick with a disease, we can quickly change it with an injection, and then we can see what humanity is really all about. When we have time and health, we may do the most amazing, unexpected things and live in the most amazing and unexpected ways with, love and value, and traveling to outer space, and traveling to the depths of our oceans, and living in peace, which would be a fabulous future for us.
Quick question for you. How long do you think that you'll live healthily?
I don't know. For me, it's never been about that. So when I hope a long time now. I really.
How do you determine that? How do you see a long time? What would be a long time for you at this stage, with your understanding of what is just lying on the edge of possibility here, which has got to be both an exciting and frustrating situation?
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. It is frustrating and it's exciting. And I think that that's one of the reasons that people don't look at this technology seriously, because they're afraid they won't see it in their lifetime, because it really is going to take a movement of most of society, at least 10% of society, to demand access to this. When I started the company, I took a couple gene therapies for humanity's sake, and I did a lot of writing around that time because I didn't know if I'd live or if I would die from it. And it really didn't matter to me as long as someone learned something from what I had done. I'm not afraid of death. I don't want to be dependent. I don't want to be sickly at the same time. But now that I've looked at this technology, if I die, don't feel sorry for me. I'm, whatever. But I don't know why someone would pick an age that they want to die at. I don't pick.
I'm just saying, based on,
done. I mean, why?
I'm just saying, what do you think? So one of the questions I was asked on Dave Asprey's podcast, and they said, well, how old do you think that you're going to live? And I think Dave said he was going to be 180, and my business partner said, I think 180 or 150. And I said some random number, 150. But in my heart of hearts, I thought, I got a shot at 120, I think, based on the growth of possibility from my perspective at that point. And when I answered the question, I felt a little bit disingenuous, because I thought I was moved by the conversation more than I actually believed. What do you feel I'm just talking, strip away all the science, strip away all the stuff. What do you think you can legitimately live to in this lifetime based on what you have access to? What you think that you'll be, or what you think will cultivate over the journey of your company?
Oh, as this company keeps going, I couldn't. I mean, the thing is, once we prove that you can break the 125 span, as long as we are regenerating bodies, if you're healthy, what do you die of? You die of a natural disaster. You die of an accident. If right now, we would have evidence that this type of technology should keep a person who would probably die around 85 alive to about 110. But I don't think we're done. So I know we're not done, because now we're looking at combining genes. And so as soon as we hit the mark where we can actually make the body regenerate just a little faster than it degenerates,
right.
I mean,
that changes the delta in a completely different direction. So you don't want to put a limit on that.
Yeah, I don't think I could, because that's kind of, I'm not really good at telling the future, but I can say that when you look at model organisms out in the world, like bowhead whales, they shouldn't. They're ginormous entities that have multitude of cellular divisions, and they can live over 250 years. There are the immortal jellyfish that, go back and forth between, but I really don't know if that qualifies or not sometimes when I break that down. There are clams that are alive for 500 years. And then you'd say, well, there's a metabolism thing, but then the bowhead whale has to exert a lot more energy than the little mung clam, I think it's called. So I think that we just are slowly unlocking keys. And I think that right now we have keys to live a natural lifespan, just very healthy. But the keys, we're not done. Mm-hmm. And as we combine these different keys to aging, that's when we're probably going to see much more impressive outcomes. And then there are genes still to find. So that, again, that's where AI can't just randomly go in and find a gene for us. We've got to find the gene, tell it, and then, start studying it. And that's also will be a big game changer. And the truth is, we live in the xylogenic grocery store, right? So we're all made of DNA. So the DNA of other species, okay, that sounds crazy, right? But the genes from light sensing algae have already been used in humans, and humans who were blind can see because of those. And these are in clinical trials. So it's possible that we will start picking and expanding our genome based on benefits that other species have to combat cancer, to combat a myriad of things. And we'll blur the line between physical enhancement and health. And that'll be a beautiful moment for us.
Well, I think it's safe to say that where we probably could have some certain common elements, which I believe that the Homo sapiens, as they are to this point, are not going to make the transition. Whether we become Homo digitalis, Homo genetic engineered, whatever this, or some fusion of that, I think that cast has already died, and that the end is already here for Homo sapiens. It is only a matter of time, whether it's in this lifetime, next lifetime, the next generation. It's based on what you're saying is available right now, based on what artificial intelligence engineers are having, the robotic engineers that are happening. We are standing on the precipice of an almost unimaginable future. And your company is on the forefront of I think what's a very exciting gene therapy technology, which could have significantly positive ramifications for the world at large. And I certainly wish you the best of success in that. Where can people find out about you, your company, and get involved in maybe changing the ignorance around this technology?
So you can learn more about us at bioviva-science.com. That's where you'll find some of our kits that we have for sale, and that's where you can contact us if you're interested in other things that we do, like our research and development. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and that's not my wheelhouse, but there is a group in the company that take care of all of that. And if you reach out and ask a question, they'll be happy to answer it.
Well, Elizabeth, this has been both an exciting and thought-provoking conversation, I think, for both myself and for our listeners. And I welcome their comments, their likes, their questions. And I encourage them to actually follow your company and what you're doing at BioViva, and to understand what is potentially at stake and how we can get this to move forward. So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule for being here. And I would like to invite you probably to come back to the podcast at some point in the future as this thing moves forward, because I know it's a part that we're very interested in understanding and seeing the development in the future, both myself and Matt, as the co-founders of our company, and what we see as the future. We've had many of these conversations over our 20 years, and many more to come. So thank you for joining us today. And for all our listeners, thank you for joining this enlightening conversation about genetics, gene therapy, bioinformatics, patient access, what you can do about accessing technology that can disrupt the aging model that we currently have. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.